Hello everyone, this is a quick look at Grant Wood, a pretty important American artist. He was born in 1891 and died in 1942. He was remembered on the back of the Iowa State Quarter. Not only his name, but the painting, the image that we have is from one of his paintings. His most famous painting is, of course, American Gothic, which he painted in 1930. We'll return to this painting, but again, this is thought of as one of the more recognizable images that we have in Western painting. There's an image of the house he kind of grew up in his first school. His family moved to Cedar Rapids, Iowa in 1901, and in 1913 he goes to the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. A Shaking Poplar from 1917 is a good example of kind of his early work. He kind of takes these frequent or a few trips over to Europe and kind of learns from the European style. And like many artists that we've looked at, this kind of opening period that he has is this time that he's kind of trying to figure out how he wants to paint and also the subject matter that he wants to paint in. You'll notice this heavy use of an earth palette, a lot of browns, a lot of grays and greens and that type of thing. And if you think of him growing up in the area that he was, this is very appropriate that this would kind of seep over into his palette himself. So as I mentioned, we have several trips, 4 trips altogether that he takes to Europe, and this is a good period to kind of look at to see him experimenting with different types of artists. You can see very, very plainly some of the artists that he's actually working with and kind of imitating, but a lot of this is this kind of soft, impressionistic style, if you will, where you're kind of diluting the forms and creating colored planes. And again, kind of removing a lot of aspects of detail in favor of just broader blocks of color, and this is very obvious, especially when you look at people, and again, we have this kind of concept of painting outdoors as well. And as we kind of continue on in this period, you can definitely see the influence of Van Gogh on his work, that kind of thicker outline that he uses to construct trees and that type of thing. But at the same time, we also have paintings like this from 1925, the Helix Welder, kind of showing this different side of what he's interested in terms of his work, and this kind of everyday experience is something that we will see kind of creeping in more and more. But again, a lot of his work through this mid part of the 20s is again this kind of impressionistic style, as we can see with the path intersect the garden. The Product Checker from 1925, kind of again a featuring of what we'll see later on, this more harsh realism and things that are very American, like the concept of the overalls and that type of thing. Greenest Brush in the Street of Paris is again very much in the style of Van Gogh, in my mind at least. This kind of thick building up of texture on the surface, and again this impressionism. And when we look at these two, the Old Shoes is very much a copy almost of a Van Gogh type of situation, and the church doorway is very much an imitation of Monet, if you will. And from this, it's interesting because then very shortly afterwards, we have a complete change in his dynamic, and we have the very famous Woman with Plants from 1929, which is modeled after his mother, and with the wonderful rickrack around the side. It's also in this time that he gets the commission to work on a Veterans Memorial in Cedar Rapids in 1928. This is a gigantic piece of stained glass that's like 16 feet tall. He actually traveled as far as Germany to actually get the pieces of glass together. The figures that we're looking at, the 6 figures represent the 6 major conflicts that occurred from the time of the founding of America forward to the time that he was at, and each of these figures is roughly life size, just to give you a perspective on the size of the window itself. And again, it's always kind of interesting to think that this might have had some role in his changeover. We have the very famous flood from 2008 that actually damaged the interior of the Veterans Memorial, and in 2014 it was reopened back to the public. But really, from this point forward, as seen in Miss France from 1929, he really does change over into this social realism, and we know from his own biography that he was influenced from artists like Jan van Eyck from his trips to Paris as well. And in 1930 he does paint American Gothic, and again this is very early in his painting career. When we look at it in proximity, he kind of just started painting this kind of social realistic style. And again, American Gothic is actually his dentist and his sister. It's supposed to be a farmer and his daughter. And American Gothic it's almost a humorous thing, because there's a Gothic window on the farmhouse, and Grant Wood thought it was kind of humorous that there would be a Gothic window in a rural location. But Stone City, Iowa, this is a great example of the type of work he also does. This landscape showing these rolling hills that Iowa has, and again also switching kind of back and forth with this realism that is almost kind of Norman Rockwell-y, if you will, kind of showing Americana and the different aspects of it. But with Grant Wood, I always find a little bit of humor. The 1930 WPA murals at the Iowa State University is another major project he engaged in, and a lot of this he designed and WPA artist actually executed. But here are some of the examples of some of the work that was done, and this is, again, these wonderful images of the American Midwest and farming communities, and he has this kind of wonderful perspective into the reality of some of these situations. The Appraisal from 1931, a wonderful painting for all of the different textures that are actually in this painting. This is what I love about this one, from the wood of the barn to the coats to the chicken. So we look at these kind of series of landscape paintings, and all of these are really resting on these ideas of perspective. You can kind of follow the dots forming perspective lines going off into the distance. The Midnight Ride of Paul Revere is this wonderful painting where you almost feel like you're this child looking down at a set, almost like a diorama constructed by a child rather than this kind of ground level view. And we get that kind of sensation from a lot of his work, this sensation that you're standing up on top of one of these larger hills that the Midwest has, and not a mountain of course but a hill, and looking down and seeing different aspects of the countryside. This kind of perspective, also known as the bird's eye perspective, is continued into The Birthplace of Herbert Hoover from 1931. There's a simplicity that's so wonderful about his paintings as well. Victorian Survival from 1931 is again kind of humorous, with this kind of faking an old school painting and then having this phone in the background. He was married from 1935 to 1938. In 1932 he also helped form an important art colony during the Depression. Another humorous painting, Daughters of the Revolution. He took the founding fathers and assumed them over to be women and put them in front of the very famous painting of George Washington. This is the painting that's referenced on the back of the quarter of Iowa. It's actually Arbor Day, this idea of this old schoolhouse, and very reminiscent of the schoolhouse we saw him going to and planting the actual tree. Portrait of Nan. Nan is his sister that we first encountered back in American Gothic. She'll be kind of one of, if not the primary female model for many of his works. Dinner for Threshers from 1934 is one of my particular favorites, because it kind of shows this dichotomy within the painting of farm life and how this aspect of work is actually divided. On the left side we have the threshers coming in from the farm, with their wonderful overalls on, going into this room, and again we have this open front on this very large dining space, and on the other side we have of course the women working just as hard, preparing the meal for the gentleman and actually bringing it out. And when you look at the full picture, it does have kind of this Last Supper kind of quality to it too. But again, this internal perspective that he would have had from growing up on a farm. And again, from 1935, we have to be reminded of the time period and that a lot of new technologies are kind of finding their way into rural society, as seen in Death on Ridge Road. And this is, again, this wonderful perspective you would have from far, far up. If you look very closely down at the very, very corner, or middle to the bottom of the canvas, you can see the people actually plowing the field themselves. And these wonderful squares that are formed by them actually plowing into the earth. And again, depending on which community you go to in the United States, different areas around my local area, we have large round circles rather than squares. We have these wonderful series of paintings kind of projecting these images of locals, like the Perfectionist from 1936. And again, a lot of these have this wonderful sense of wit that you kind of find in a lot of American work. The Sentimental from 1936. Supporter from 1936 as well. And again, a lot of these I've remarked, you could easily find these people around the country even to this day. And again, that's what I think of them as being such wonderful caricatures of America for that reason. Honorary degree, and again, we have that use of the Gothic window in the background, and you'll notice how the sash of the degree is actually mimicking the corner of the window as it's being put over. And as we look at these, we have to remark that these are, of course, prints, seed time and harvest. And I might be mistaken, but I believe that these are actually mezzotins. And the method that you do with that is you take your metal plate and you make it essentially look like sandpaper, and then the areas that are white are where you're actually going to grind it down till it's smooth, so that when you ink it, the raised areas that have that sandpaper type of texture are going to pick up the ink. And when you look at prints like these that kind of have that all over texture, it's very hard to imagine that they're not that. But again, looking at these, we kind of see the same thematics that we have with a lot of his other work kind of just transferred over into the style of print. The term, this is of course regional art, regionalism, along with Stuart Curry and Thomas Hart Benton are the three larger practitioners of this, all from the same time period. Shrine Quartet, again, kind of a humorous look at America, and again, I think that he's enjoying the presence of these people more than he's making fun of them. I think that there's something very wholesome about that. Parson Weems' Parable from 1939, showing the famous parable of George Washington cutting down the cherry tree. And this is always so funny because the young George Washington is just George Washington with an old George Washington's head put on it, and this wonderful picture that we have of Grant Wood actually working on the painting also gives you an idea of the scale. But again, how do you make a child look like George Washington? You just make him George Washington. And as we kind of continue with his career, we kind of see the same motives reappearing, this use of the landscape and the way he's kind of making it in this kind of curvature type of way. Just a lot of perspectives into what the rural communities around the 1940s are actually going to look like in the Midwest. And again, a lot of these newer instances that are occurring. January from 1940, you have to love the little feet print wandering off or wandering in, depending on your perspective. But again, he has this stylization that begins to occur as his time continues. February from 1940, showing, and again, we do have to remember the world events that are occurring at this time too. It is, essentially between 1939 through 1945, a little bit onward, that we have World War II occurring. But this is an excellent example of the precision he's able to attain in his work as well. The family doctor, of course, being the idea of the doctor coming and treating the whole family at once. Spring in the Country is a part of a two-part painting set here, and again we kind of see the advancing of his technique and the integrating of a lot of the different styles that we have, and the interesting thing about Grant Wood is that his style does kind of continue to evolve. He doesn't stay kind of centered into one of the aspects of what he's doing, and as we kind of see his work continue, we see a lot of that impressionism that we saw at the very beginning of his career kind of migrating back into his work. His work becomes a little bit more abstract, and again he starts looking at the same type of landscape, but through a kind of a different perspective. Like this is a wonderful example, Iowa Cornfield from 1941, seeing these thick built-up brush strokes, not as polished as the previous examples that we've had. His life is cut kind of prematurely short. He dies of pancreatic cancer, and it really is kind of a shame, because when we look at his work and where it was evolving to, it really did have this promise of going in a completely different direction. I like to end the conversation with Sentimental Ballad, just as a way, of course, of remembering the artist, and also the complexity of work that he was able to accomplish in his lifetime.